I would say in the beginning, your guess is as good as mine. If you start out with a really, really big number, it can feel extremely overwhelming. And so instead of asking, well, what's the number I should be aiming for? I'd much rather focus on what are the good money habits and behaviors that I can learn now to set myself up for success. And then eventually we'll get to that number.
How much is enough? In these early days of life after graduation, it might feel like the only answer to that question is all that I have, John, because I'm really not making much right now. And that might be true, but the way we answer that question has much further reaching impact than we might anticipate today. Very practically, how much we say is enough today has a significant impact on how much we have available tomorrow. But it also has powerful ramifications on our long-term spiritual formation, because like it or not, or realize it or not, we are being discipled about money. And that has real-life impact for us and for the world around us. Today, we're joined by Shang Saavedra, friend of the podcast, founder of Save My Sense, and the leading expert in wealth and mental health. And Shang is going to apply her expertise here as she helps us answer the big question, how much is enough? Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele. This one's for you, alumni. Shang, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, John, for having me. So exciting to be here again.
Yes, I love it that you said yes to this. As I was sending you an email, I was like, have I already asked Shang for too much in the world of alumni podcasting? We'll let her say no if that is the case. So I am so excited that you said yes, and that we get to sit down and hang out for another conversation together. But for our listeners, maybe who didn't catch any of our previous episodes, we'll be sure to link them in the show notes so that they can tune in. But Shang, will you just give us a brief introduction? Tell us about who you are. Tell us a little bit about what you do and the things that you've been spending your time with recently.
Yeah. My name is Shang Saavedra. I'm the CEO and founder of the company Save My Sense. I was part of InterVarsity, both undergrad at Harvard and in business school at University of Chicago.
Nice.
And basically after UChicago, I had a pretty corporate consulting type kind of career. And then my husband and I, we really focused on being super frugal. And that's how we were able to save and invest and finish investing for our retirement when I turned 31 and he was 36. Nowadays, I'm 40 years old. I live in Southern California with my entire family, which includes 2 children and 1 more baby on the way.
Yes.
And I was able to quit my corporate life 2 years ago to focus on educating people on financial literacy, writing my book, Wealth is a Mindset, which came out January 2025, and focusing primarily on being a great mom to all of my children.
Yes, man, that's so awesome. What a great resume. Well, that's some exciting stuff that you get to do and spend your time with. I love that. And you know, part-time InterVarsity alumni podcaster. You've done it enough now that you can add that to the list. Add that to the list as well. And Shang, you are joining us for a series that we're doing on big questions that we know recent grads often ask, or that we would encourage them to be asking and thinking through as they're navigating this first year of life after graduation. And so the big question we're asking today is, how much is enough? And we could take that question a number of different ways, and we probably will, but I'm just going to start without any further clarification. I'm just going to softball pitch that question to you and ask, if you were to sit down across the table with a recent InterVarsity alum who knows about your background and your expertise, and who said, Shang, how much is enough? What would you tell them?
I would say in the beginning, your guess is as good as mine. and I think that's honest, because we don't know where life is going to take us. And even when I was like fresh out of school and I had some, mathematical skills, and I started asking this question, I ran some very basic calculations, and it said, well, you need at the very least more than $1 million. And this was, in the middle of the aughts. And $1 million just sounded like such an impossible number.
Yeah.
And I want to convey that to everybody else. I was like, if you start out with a really, really big number, it can feel extremely overwhelming. And it doesn't give you any concrete advice or steps as to what it takes to get there. And so instead of asking, well, what's the number I should be aiming for? I'd much rather, especially young folks, to focus on what are the good money habits and behaviors that I can learn now in my 20s to set myself up for not only success, but also bumps along your journey, because you're going to have a lot of bumps going forward throughout your life. And then eventually we'll get to that number. We can figure it out, actually do calculate it for people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. But it's not something that I focus on right away.
Okay, that's really helpful that even maybe in the face value version of that question that I'm asking, that you would say, actually, for your listeners, now is the time to establish healthy practices rather than worrying so much about a specific concrete number that's like down the road. So I'm now going to dig into the weeds just a little bit on that question and ask it in two different ways. I'll modify the first one a little bit based on what you've shared already. Okay. So I'm hoping we can answer this question in two ways. One is very practical, and one is actually at the level of spiritual formation. And honestly, formation actually sounds like the right word to use for both of these. So like at the level of practical budgetary formation, like what are some of those things that you would encourage young alumni to do, some of those early practices to establish? But then the second question I hope you'll answer for us is, at the level of spiritual formation, how do we discern how much is enough according to like what I need to live day to day and throughout my lifetime, which draws on the first question that you'll answer. But then how much is it that the Lord has entrusted me to steward and to use for his kingdom? Like, how do I figure both pieces of that out? Or how do I start figuring both of those pieces out early on here?
Let's start with the practical side, which is, how do you figure out how to allocate the first, second, third paycheck that you have coming in?
Yes.
And this one's actually, I think, a little bit easier to explain. And this is a
great.
brilliant phrase that the financial aid officer at my business school told us on like the first day of orientation. She said, if you live like a CEO when you're a student, then you're going to live like a student when you're a CEO.
Wow.
And the point to that is basically saying, the more you spend, the less you have available to build up savings and build up wealth. So in the very beginning, when I have a budgeting 101 course, I tell people, okay, learn how to read your paycheck, because there are some lines on there that kind of read like gibberish when you first look at it.
Right.
Know what the heck, what's a federal tax? What's state income tax? What is Social Security? Like, where's all this money going to?
Yeah.
Then you know how much you have left. Then you subtract your top basic bills from this. So this would include your rent, your student loan minimum payments, now that everybody's back on, the repayment track.
Yep.
And your basic groceries and daily needs. And then whatever you have left, you need to make a decision as to whether you want to save it for something, spend it, or something else. But this is where the good money habits come in. I was like, the more you sacrifice when you're younger, the more options you're going to have when you're older with that free money that you may or may not have left at the end of the day. But at least start doing that calculation right now. And it's not hard. It's arithmetic, my friends. It doesn't even use high school level math, but it's something so crucial that I find many 20-year-olds not really paying attention to.
And it sounds to me like one of the really important practices here is really being mindful about what you might consider as like the non-negotiables of your budget. Like you say start off with those top tier things, like the things that are expected of you or that are required for living, like having a place to stay and having food to eat, paying for those student loans, or else you're going to get in trouble. But at times we might be tempted to sort of put a few other things in that category of like, I need this. I need like fill in the blank thing each week or each day or each month, whatever it might be. And to ask the questions of like, is that actually necessary? And that probably helps set us up better down the road for having more of that freed up cash to be able to do strategic, thoughtful things with, rather than blowing them on too many artisan cups of coffee every week.
This is where the spiritual formation comes in, because we have a model in the Bible that tells us where money is better spent than not.
Yeah. Yes.
We have a very strong commandment to tithe, which oftentimes we don't pay attention to when we're very young. I certainly did not. Like, I know it's a commandment, but can we ignore that one? No, you can't. You can't. So that's very clear in the Bible. And then you also see many instances where when people are in trouble or when they don't have enough, look at where God provides. He does provide for the very basics. He gives people shelter, food, medical care. Like a lot of the miracles that Jesus works on are medical in nature. That speaks to the fact that God is a healer and focuses on healing. There's not a lot of encouragement of extravagance in the Bible, I would say. And when things are extravagant, they're to praise God. Like they're for the purposes of building a lavish temple for God, or to make the sacrifices. You notice that the lavishness in the Bible is typically oriented towards God because he's the source of all wealth in the world. So it doesn't make sense, right, for it to not, go back to him. And that spiritual formation, I would say, takes longer for people to incorporate into their day-to-day finances. But I think when you really, really dig into the not necessarily like rules, but like the framework, the foundational like model that God has laid out for us in the Bible, you'll see that it really talks about moving away from the worship of money and seeing money as a resource and tool to carry out whatever purpose God has designed us to do so on his behalf.
Yes. Yeah. And whether we want to really acknowledge it or not, money is one of those things that we are being discipled about. We are being discipled in finances and money and what the purpose of money is, how we use it, whether it's ours or not. Like, we are being discipled in those things by lots of messages from the world and from our churches and everywhere. Like, there's discipleship coming at us from every angle. And whether or not we're being thoughtful about the messages we're receiving, that's something for us to sort of keep in mind. Like, what am I hearing? What am I observing around me about the ways that money is meant to be used? And where is that, whether I realize it or not, or whether I'm doing it purposefully or not, where are the ways that I am applying what I'm learning in my own finances? And now is the time to really look through your teachers on money and decide, am I going to be taught by the world, or am I going to be taught by Jesus and his example and the example of the kingdom in what it looks like to engage with finances?
And that is super difficult without accountability, without being in community with other believers. Because if you don't do that, the pull of what the world believes around money is so strong. I mean, that's why the Bible writes about the allure of money and power so many times, because it knows it's probably one of the areas where the devil has a lot of energy focused on.
Yes. Yes.
And having also experienced the pull of lifestyle inflation, right? It's very attractive. It does make you feel good in the short term to pursue lifestyle inflation. People celebrate it in the media. So I also want to acknowledge that to try to resist all of those temptations is very revolutionary. It is very countercultural, and you're going to look very different. And that's part of following Jesus Christ, is that you're not following what the rest of the world is doing.
Yeah. And I also think one of the messages that is sort of tied, like there's a thread tied to this, is the way that we observe our work and our ability to work. Is that, we can think like, well, money, the paycheck that I get is my reward for all of my hard work and all of the influence that I've put into my job and the things that I've sacrificed and, the time that I spent at school and investing that time. This is sort of my payout for doing those kinds of things. And it can almost boil down the dignity of my work and the influence that I get to have on the world around me to just dollars and cents. And like, this is my reward right here. And so I need to keep working hard so that I can keep getting my reward. And then I'm going to spend my reward the way I want to because it's my reward. And boy, that really kind of dumbs down the beauty of what we've been invited into as beings who work and who invest in the world around us in these different ways, and who are working for as unto the Lord, and not for a paycheck at the end of the week.
I mean, if you think about it, in the Old Testament, some of the most influential people are very, very broke priests.
Yes, exactly. Oh my goodness, absolutely, and prophets and people who are, John the Baptist, who's preparing the way for Jesus Christ himself, is like living in the desert, wearing his burlap underwear and eating bugs. I mean, you talk about somebody who's not having an extravagant life, and then Jesus follows right up with that of, the Son of Man doesn't have a place to lay his head at night. And like, wow, what an interesting invitation. And then when you fast forward into the early church, like you mentioned tithing. And what's funny is that I would say that the example of the early church is something even far more generous and sacrificial than even just that tithe. It is where whatever the need was, people supplied the need so that there was nothing for their community to worry about. And it was like people would sell off chunks of land and bring the money and give it to the apostles, and they would give it to everybody. And it's like, man, you talk about sacrifice. That is pretty insane. And that is a big calling as far as the resources that we've been given and the ways that those can be invested into the community around us.
Absolutely. And I think, John, you and I, we talked on an earlier episode as to, well, how do you, as a Christian, view being blessed with a lot of money? Because, part of the reason why my husband and I were able to save and reach retirement so early is because we were also highly compensated workers in corporate America due to our education and our degrees and everything that has happened. And I don't feel shame over that because...
Great.
And I don't want people hearing this episode to feel like shameful if you are a highly compensated individual either, because God gives each of us resources and talents for a very specific purpose. And so it doesn't mean that people who make more are just necessarily better people. That's absolutely not biblical at all. But he makes it very clear that however much money he gives us, we are his portfolio managers. So if we get a lot, and to just talk about the boss who gave the talents to his 3 servants, to those to whom much is given, you're also expected to manage it extremely well. So if you are in a highly compensated industry, or if you have a lot of resources, then the expectation, I think, from God is also like, what are you using it for? Are you using it to serve yourself? Or are you using your network, your talent, and your resources to serve, really, really great purposes that God has in mind? And I think that was where it really helped solve the conundrum for me in the beginning, because I was like, oh, am I sinning by making a lot of money? Like I seriously thought at some point that maybe I shouldn't be making a lot of money, that maybe all of this is wrong. But as I also explored, I went through my spiritual formation years, many, many years of asking these tough questions. I landed on, okay, whatever you do have, make sure that you're using it more so to serve others than you are using it to serve yourself.
Yes. Okay, so then can we keep narrowing in? We've been talking around this and in it already, but can we keep leaning into this idea of spiritual formation? And in your experience, whether it's personal, and the years of formation and asking those questions that you have spent, and I'm sure continue to spend, and having check-ins with the Lord of like, okay, God, has anything changed about how you're inviting me to invest? So whether it's from personal experience or conversations that you've had with clients as you've been coaching them through and helping them discern some of these kinds of things, like, how is it that we grow in our ability to discern what is, this is the wrong analogy, but I'm going to say it anyway. So people give me grace for saying it this way. Like, what piece of the pie is for me to spend on the things that I'm interacting with on a day-to-day basis? And what portion of the pie is for me to say, God, what do you want to do with this? And I will allot it to those places, and I will send it off into the places that it's supposed to go in your kingdom. Like, how do we grow in developing those things? Take us there, please.
Well, the good news is if you ask God for advice in this, he will present you with situations like this.
Yes.
And especially when I realized, okay, I wasn't tithing as much as I should be. So this was a thing that I confronted myself with in the mid-20s. And I was like, okay, wait, to tithe up to the 10%, I actually do need to pull back on some of my spending. And so I asked God for help. I was like, I would like to get there, but right now I don't really know how to. And then so over time, I realized I just got more and more creative with saving money. Like, just things started to click. I learned how to live with less things. I learned how to shop thrift. I found out that you don't have to pay full price for everything. There's always a way to get it for less if you really get creative. So those things happened over time. And then, there was a point in my life too where I was like, well, I'm not sure what themes I like my giving to go to. Because I think most people have themes. Like most people have certain organizations and things and beliefs that they want to uphold, right? Thankfully, my husband had some idea, but those were his ideas. And then I also found that throughout my life, I'm like, yeah, there are going to be causes that I get more and more excited about. And then you engage with people who do work in those areas. And then naturally people are going to come and ask you for money. Like, that's a given. You're naturally going to have people come and ask you for money if you're not in ministry yourself. Right? So I'm like, okay, that's also not that hard. You get asked to give. And then I think some of the other times where I really found my understanding of money grow in leaps and bounds, it's actually in the hardest moments in your life. Like, for example, having a terrible time job searching and not being able to pivot, or perhaps getting a bad review at work, which means a lot less bonuses and things like that. Or, for example, after I had my first child, confronting my own beliefs around how much time do I dedicate to corporate work versus, dedicating to motherhood. So God is also going to present very challenging situations into your life. And those are, they're not pleasant opportunities. None of them are ever pleasant. But I think once you go through a lot of discomfort, it's also good to pause and say, hey, remember, sometimes the discomfort is the growth that God is asking you to do. And so this is when you have to lean on wisdom. I read a lot of books. For example, I highly recommend the book Every Good Endeavor by Timothy Keller. Really, really great book about thinking about the purpose of your career. And he also wrote a similar book called Counterfeit Gods, which talks about what are going to be worship of other non-godly things that come up when you're more of an MBA or business background. So read books, going to community group or Bible study, important. And then sometimes a random sermon, brings up all those things. So I think those difficult circumstances also challenge you to have to grow if you want to, grow deeper in your relationship with God.
Yes. Yeah. So I hear a few different approaches to sort of feeling this out. One is there's some level of observation of other people. You mentioned your husband, and like, he's passionate about giving in these places. So, okay, this is where we start. But then It doesn't just end with, oh, I'll give where other people are excited to give. And it's like, no, what are the things that I'm excited about? Where are the places that I'm really passionate about? And like, oh, guess what? There's a ministry that's doing that. I'm going to give there. Or there's a very practical boots on the ground organization that's doing that, like in my city or in my hometown. Like, okay, sweet. I'm going to invest there. But also that there are that there are difficult formative places that provide us with an opportunity to say, okay, when you are walking through the valley of the shadow of death, do you believe that giving is still one of those right paths that the Lord is leading you on, even as it goes through a difficult circumstance, a difficult time, and to say, okay, those are formative moments that help me decide and discern what does it look like to be generous and to invest in the kingdom. As you talk about those experiences in particular, it reminds me of the story of Elijah. I think it's Elijah. Sometimes I mix up Elijah and Elisha, but Elijah, he's delivered the bad news to King Ahab. I believe that, like, hey, guess what? For 3 years, there's not going to be any rain. Yeah. And then the very next thing that happens is Elijah goes out into the desert and he needs to be provided.
Elijah.
It is Elijah. Okay, he goes out into the desert, and the Lord provides for him from a brook and from ravens, but eventually the brook dries up, which is funny because that is like the result of no rain. But then the next thing that happens is the Lord sends him into a town and says, "Go talk to this woman, and she's going to provide for you." And I think a lot of the times I like to put myself in the position of Elijah and say, like, okay, the Lord's going to provide for me; He's going to take care of me, and that's true. But sometimes I'm that woman, because what's interesting is that her story was one of Elijah asking her for food, and she says, actually, I have just enough to feed myself and my son.
Yes.
And that's it, like one more time, and then we're done.
Yeah.
And Elijah's still like, would you feed me first? And sometimes we're put in that position, which requires a lot of wisdom, discernment, and trust of saying, like, okay, God, I'm in a tight spot and somebody has just asked me to help support them. What in the world do I do? And those are really formative moments to find ourselves in.
That's literally, that story brings me shivers every time. That I think it's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because it's also showing that God works miracles in sometimes the most humble of situations. It's not the ones that we expect. So it's also saying, hey, you can be called upon to give at any moment, but like you kind of have to lean into and trust that God has a purpose through all of this. And I'll actually share a personal story from my work.
Thank you.
So 2 years ago, in June of 2023, I left my very, very cushy corporate job to become default parent to my children and run Save My Sons on the side. So to give people an idea, in a typical day, I wake up from 6:30 a.m. and I go to sleep hopefully around 10 to 11. I don't know if that always happens.
Sure.
So the time that I have dedicated to working on Save My Sons is usually from 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. in the afternoon, but it is interrupted by, notifications from children's school, running errands, cooking, cleaning the house. So you can imagine it's not a full 6 hours of work. It's like interrupted couple hours of work. Whereas people who work a more corporate job, you probably have an uninterrupted 8 to 10 hours to work each day, depending on your schedule. So that's already frustrating. And then early 2025, a lot of turmoil happened in the economy. So we had mass layoffs in high-end service and tech industries. Then we had uncertainty over the tariffs and how that would play out. And then across all of this, basically my business, which I do charge for my work, because I do think people need to pay to actually want to do the personal finance that's involved. I saw my work income drop. Like we're talking 40 to 70% year over year drops, depending on what month we're working on. And even though I didn't depend on the income, I was like, I feel like God is saying something, and I don't know if He's telling me I need to quit or do something else. I was like, what is this telling me? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
And at the same time, I'm pregnant with a third kid, and talking to my husband through all of this. I couldn't tell you the full reason for this, but what I ended up doing, I was like, well, I don't have that much client work coming in, so I actually expanded my pro bono program this year. So in most years, I do pro bono work. I sometimes give free webinars to schools. And on the coaching side, I have my themes, the things I care about. I care a lot about single moms. That's like a huge focus of what I do, especially those in a very difficult divorce situation, separation situation with no income or domestic violence. I also care a lot about people who are unable to work due to mental or physical illness. So those are the situations where I give a lot of pro bono work out, and I expanded that. And so, yes, I saw no money coming in, but it was amazing to get to work with so many families and be able to help them see hope where they never saw any when it came to finances. For some of them, I was able to say, okay, I know the bare minimum you need to do to at least get things better. And for already one of them told me that she got a job offer that paid a lot more than what she currently had, which is fantastic. For another person, I was like, okay, you just need, this many more credit hours to get this degree that you want. She thought that she needed to put it on loans. I was like, you have just enough to not have to take on any more loans to get there. And then we'll get you debt free. She has other loans, but we'll get you debt free in so many years. And then so I was like, yeah, I feel like that this is an example of where like God is going to bring something very, very uncomfortable to you. And you just got to lean into it and hope to do whatever it is that God is asking you to do. And we'll see the results of it later on.
Yes. And I love sort of an offshoot of that. And I want to be careful the way that I say this, because I don't want it to feel like an out to not be generous with money, because money, again, is one of those things that we are being discipled in and that disciples us just on its own as we use it. So we need to be thoughtful about money in particular. But the other thing that you're bringing up there to me is the creativity of generosity. In that, what you were doing in those spaces was you trusting the Lord for Him to provide, but was also you giving in ways where you're like, this is what I have to give. This is the way that I can be generous to people around me. It's in my expertise. It's in my passions. It's in these particular, engaging with these particular people groups. And I really want to lean in here because I feel like this is what God is inviting me to do in this challenging season. And to say, generosity is so much bigger than we oftentimes boil it down to, which is just, am I giving enough money away?
Yeah.
And while we do need to be generous with our finances because it's something that influences the condition of our heart for some reason. God, why is money something that does that so powerfully? For some reason it is, and we need to keep doing that. But also, we can be creative about the ways that we are generous. And so we can grow our generosity portfolio in using our time and our talents in these unique ways, like what you've just demonstrated in that story, which is super cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the other story in the Bible that I think about a lot of how like our unique skills are used in different ways is actually the David and Goliath story. If you think about it, David eventually becomes, one of the greatest kings in the Bible, but he's the 8th born son, like the one that nobody cares about.
Yeah.
Really? He looks after the sheep. And because of his skill set as a shepherd, he knows how to aim rocks. And then that's what led him to defeat Goliath. And it's just like, who could have known? Who could have known that was what God intended for David to do at that time?
Yes, exactly. Who could have known? And also just a word of like what it looks like for what might feel like such a small thing to be invested that ends up having such powerful ramifications. And that's just, what an incredible story. That's one that I have not yet heard equated to generosity and spiritual formation around money. And I love that. I love mining new places to think about these kinds of stories. That's awesome. Shang, we've talked about a number of really fantastic things here. And so I'd like to angle us towards closing out our time together with two final questions for you to address. One very practical and one sort of wide open for you. One is that you have a ton of experience doing this work one-on-one with people or with couples or whatever it might be. And you're an InterVarsity alumna. So like, just right there, it feels like, gosh, there's just so much trust that automatically builds because you get where our alumni are coming from in really powerful ways. And that's super cool. So I'm wondering, like, for our alumni, how can they keep engaging with you and the work that you're doing in this really critical season of life as they think about money and how much is enough and how do I form that part of my life? So how can they engage with you? And second thing, is there a final piece of advice or just a shepherding word of encouragement that you would give to an alum who's asking these questions about how much is enough?
Yeah, I would say a lot of the knowledge that I've had in my head got summarized in my book. So check out my book, Wealth is a Mindset by Shang Saavedra. But you can also, if you're on social media, you can find me on Instagram at Save My Cents, cents as in cents and dollars, all one word. And I try to make it fun. And if I were to leave behind a nugget of wisdom focused on personal finance and also on the InterVarsity crowd, I would say, well, that's if anything, lean into giving, and you would be surprised at how much giving out brings back to you in ways that you could not have imagined. Like I can talk on and on about how I think there are many, many blessings in my life that came later on as a result of me just giving in faith earlier in life. But God is going to give you exactly what you need. Like, you have to trust that. Don't try to trust yourself. We can't trust ourselves, but we can definitely trust that God is going to provide.
How much is enough, alumni? Well, as the answer so often is in the adulting world, it depends. But as we ask this question, I think we're led into asking a more fundamental question. Do I trust God? Do I trust that He's going to take care of me no matter what? And am I prepared to let Him lead the way in providing for me in His way and in His time? And those are not easy questions to answer honestly. But as we ask the question and clarify our trust in the Lord and keep growing in our trust, our answer to the original question becomes clearer. And it may or may not include a specific number, but it will include a growing heart posture that leaves you open to whatever the Lord asks you to give and whatever He invites you to keep. Remember that our God is generous, not just to others, but to you too, alumni. And if you're looking for a place to start giving, why not consider your InterVarsity chapter account? Support your staff, your chapter, the ministry that's happening back on campus. Or you could always support after 4. Not saying, just saying. Shang, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I love that we have alumni like you hard at work in this area of expertise. If you'd like to hear more practical financial wisdom from Shang, check the show notes to links to one of our previous chats with her. Then be sure to come back next week as we shift our focus away from big questions and back to some alumni-focused ministry stories. We're going to hear from Kristen Dalton, a Greek IV alumna and Greek IV staff, about the night 100 Greek students said yes to Jesus. Amazing story. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Zentera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.